like to share with you is a bit of background, which I like because it's also a quite different. I was schooled in Germany, and then I went to Spain and to other countries and to Austria and living there, and this is now the 5th country I'm living in, and still coming from the German education system, which is very different from the UK, and also related, for example, to the professional education, which is very different from the UK. And I think I will make a small comments on this in the background, then the concepts of knowledge and knowledge management, and then a method which I developed to implement knowledge management on organizations. We are now down to a lower level. We are not talking about the policy, but about how organizations deal or more effectively exploit and generate knowledge. And then a brief summary. But before I start, I would like to ask you to answer my question in terms of when this was published. Did we ever run the ABC project? I think we did when O'Reilly was here. Any good? That's too far back for me. So runs a pattern of conversation that any person has heard. No one in the company now knows whether the project was a success or a terrible flop, because O'Reilly is gone and the company hasn't any memory. So the scheme is tried again, maybe it's another mistake, and in any case the details must be worked out from scratch. O'Reilly had the whole project done up in a portfolio style, but he took the only one left in the files along with him to the new job. So in 2 large organizations, the author she had worked, every project considered actually and carried out stood in relation to the company as a pioneer effort, an experiment without precedent, without a gauge of experience with which to measure the possible outcome. So when do you think was this published? Which year? Any guess? So who is breaking the ice? 1926. Right? Any other suggestions? There's no mistake here, by the way. You can't make any mistake. Nobody?
1892.
Sorry?
1892.
1892. Oh, that's even older. Well, when I use this, sometimes people come up with 1970, 1990, or 2000. Actually, it was published in 1941 in the Harvard Business History Review, and she was talking about marketing campaigns running in the 30s in the US. So, and companies never remember. You could also put today in a paper and you might be able to publish it as well. So not much has changed. Maybe you haven't learned. But I think the second learning this particular paper is really interesting in, because what do you think the author proposed as a solution to how to create a memory for that company in 1940, 41? Any idea, any suggestions?
I should imagine.
Sorry?
I should imagine that it was the solution was some sort of capture.
Capture, yeah.
Having some sort of filing system, perhaps,
Yeah.
or some sort of record
Okay.
where the
Yeah.
project could be recorded and retained.
Yes. And whom should we contract to do this? Any guessing?
Let's imagine, because it's published in the Bulletin of Business Historical Society, that it might be a business historian that should be contracted.
You have read it, isn't it? Exactly, it's right. It's a historian, and this kind of suggestions you never read in any knowledge management literature. And I like this because not only that I have a favorite for historical developments, but if you realize the historic procedure, it's not looking only on one side, contrasting different sides, having the favors and the back, interpreting the statistics, getting to the facts, and not the marketing guys who painted this was a nice project, and we were having a big success, and so on. So this is something, and for example, I was once asked by Henkel, which is a large German multinational corporation, doing this hair shampoo and this kind of stuff, and they do this kind of stuff from marketing projects, and obviously they have to learn. For example, they have to learn that in Arab countries you read from the other side, from right to left, while we in Europe read right from left to right. And obviously, if you have here the dirty shirt, and then you have the washing powder, and then you have the white shirt, if you use this in an Arab company, you will never sell your washing powder. So that's very important to learn from other companies. So in terms of the current state of knowledge management, in terms of academia, research, colleagues have claimed that we are in a pre-science, if you take to Kuhn paradigmas of how science developed, we are in a kind of pre-science state with different paradigmas competing each other, and with a disagreement about the fundamentals in the field. And you will see this when I come later to the definitions, what is understood as knowledge. In terms of practice, industrial practice, business practice, the Bain management consultancy company does every couple of years a survey about the most used management tools, and knowledge management still figures among the 25 most used tools, and even projected by an increase of 30% from 2010 to 2011. And recently, a professor from the university in Germany, he carried out on behalf of the Ministry of Economics and Technology in Germany a representative survey of the so-called Mittelstand, which is small and medium-sized businesses in Germany, 3,400 countries, and concluded that knowledge-oriented management has a significant influence on performance. So basically, they identified three types of how business owners and managers conduct this, and it has some payoff in terms of performance of their small and medium-sized businesses. Okay, so maybe background. I just want to give you one example. When I'm a social scientist trained by Göttingen, and then I went to Fraunhofer, which is one of the largest applied research organizations in the world. We have about 13,000 employees, 1 billion budget, and it's 56 institutes all over Germany, and it's applied research. So 80% of the budget of an institute has to come from competitive tenders, for example, 50% from companies and 30% from national or European projects, and 20% is kind of taxpayers' money. And when I started, we were looking into the tacit knowledge of skilled workers. So those standing on the machine, working the metal, producing these components Ed spoke about, which then are helping Airbus and Boeing to let their airplanes fly. So these kind of workers, and it was a problem from the traditional non-computerized machines, where people with the vibration, with the sound, knew that it goes well, to go to the CNC controlled machines. And our task was to understand this tacit knowledge and to try to understand how it can be transferred towards the new generation of machines. And we observed colleagues working with BMW and with other big companies in Germany in order to understand this. And since then, I have a huge problem when the Anglo-American published literature speaks about knowledge workers, which are mostly referred to white-collar office workers jungling with information and making predictions about certain levels of investments or not. So for me, this kind of understanding how the material works, being able to process the signals from the material, how it reacts to certain interventions, this is a huge skill, and this is something which a lot of companies in the so-called Mittelstand, which are leading companies, which are sometimes having the market share of 80% in the world market. A couple of companies from the German so-called Mittelstand are huge importance. The most thing I will talk about is projects we've made with a lot of companies here about how to improve, how to assess, how we deal with knowledge in our daily working procedures, in our business processes, in our organizational processes. And maybe currently I'm leading a project with quite a lot of countries, colleagues from countries, and what we are doing is we are looking into a survey, what are the knowledge needs from previous work and what should be captured for future work projects. And we are also doing a research roadmap on future research and knowledge management, and we are having 18 countries, about 180 experts interviewing, and unfortunately none yet from the Gulf region. We have a colleague in Egypt and Morocco and Turkey, but unfortunately not yet somebody who's contributing something from the Gulf region, and maybe somebody might be interested to join our network. Right, concepts. So basically what you sometimes read in this knowledge management papers and books, that they avoid defining what it's meant with knowledge, and actually it's hard, but some people tried it. For example, as we are in Britain, the British Standard Institute published so-called, well, not a standard, but a recommendation based on the insights from some consultants, business practitioners and academics, and they define knowledge as a generic description of the following: conceptual knowledge, explicit knowledge, operational knowledge, synthetized knowledge, systemic knowledge, tested knowledge. So quite an enumeration, and now we know what it is. Then the colleagues from America, Davenport and Prusek, give us the idea that knowledge is a fluid mix of framed experiences, values, contextual information, and insights that provides a framework for elevating and incorporating new experiences and information. So it originates and is applied in the minds of the knowers. In organizations, it often becomes embedded not only in documents or repositories, but also in organizational routines. So the way we work, processes, practices, and norms. Yeah, that's more from the standard and from the academic discipline. And two guys from the practice say that knowledge is a capacity for effective action, knowledge is information with value. So basically there's no consensus as the colleagues who reviewed the field, and the most used differentiation is this from the biologic of philosopher Michael Polanyi, who describes this as tacit dimension, and it's kind of this iceberg kind of metaphor he uses. And all what I can have so far experienced in this company projects, knowledge is always a certain domain, and it's always a combination of this explicit, implicit elements. And I observed quite a lot of failures when companies, with their efforts to implement a system, only focus on kind of explicit and don't take account the other part under the waterline. And this has created, especially in the 90s, a lot of investments, and those who profited from this are basically the IT companies providing the tools, but not the user and those who have invested for these tools. So in case that you have to decide and how to implement this, be aware that only focusing on external explicit knowledge and not taking into account what is in the brains of those who should use it would be a huge misinvestment. And unfortunately, still today, especially in engineering-led companies, there's a tendency to overvalue this explicit know-how, which is described in procedures and rules. And if you come then from the IT, this is mostly used a kind of knowledge ladder, which we have the signs and characters, we combine them with the syntax to get data and putting in the context, then you got the information, and then we integrate it with different information to have some rules, and sometimes it's added wisdom on top of this. This is also quite information-based, information biased, and also sometimes leads to this bias in investments, which will then use a lot of your resources and time, but not contribute basically to a continued dissatisfaction with the discipline and with the term. And then there's another one, which is basically, this is kind of that we can transform this into packages and then transfer it. And here, this is maybe also what Ed was talking about. You have to practice something, and then there's getting a knowing, and to create this knowing, for example, in your country, you have to be able to practice this somewhere, either in the origin, in the country of origin, where you have schooled, where you've trained, and then implemented in your country. Without this kind of practice, we won't have any transfer, and you only will pay the consultants who help you to establish something. When we look at the definitions of knowledge management, we can see two basic understanding. One is looking for management of activities of processes to enhance the competitiveness, for the better use and creation of individual and collective knowledge resources. This is a kind of European agreement. And then there is the other emphasis, which is more managing the environment, so that this environment encourages the creation, shared, learned, enhanced, organized, and utilized of the knowledge for the benefit of the organization. I tried to highlight it's always towards competitiveness, or to try to support the goals of the organization, and then either it's focused on creating an environment where these activities can flourish, or try to manage these activities and design these activities deliberately. So there's a kind of different nuances how to do this in practice. And some critics, they say that you can't manage knowledge, so this is not possible. You only can create an environment. I'm not fully agree with this. You can do it, but it's not easy. So, brief summary. Practitioners have not reached a consensus about the definition of knowledge. KM failures are often due to the emphasis of this understanding of knowledge as explicit, and therefore I would suggest that an organization should work out their own understanding of knowledge with those who have to use this based on the business needs, and the KM framework, which I explain in a minute, might help you to communicate and achieve this shared understanding what should KM be for our organization. Yeah, knowledge management step by step. When you go out in the market, that you look into the literature, you find about 100 KM methods and tools. So now you have to choose. And if you go to look to cluster these methods and tools, you take away all the synonyms and all the product names, you end up with about 80 or about 100 tools. You're still somebody who's not experienced this can only rely to a consultant who is honest and help you to understand what is best maybe for your organization or your department or your enterprise. So there's a lot of out there, and the difficulty is now how to find the right tool, the right approach, the right method. In the early 2001, we undertook a global Delphi study asking about 60 experts in KM around the world, practitioners and academics, about what are the challenges, what are the advances in KM. And one most pressing problem, but also most promising approach was, how can we integrate knowledge management activities into our working processes, or called business processes or organizational processes. I use this term synonym in this presentation. And so how, and this was also basically what the projects I was referring to are about. And what I'm talking about basically is based on a survey with companies I undertook 15 years ago. We analyzed about 160 frameworks around the world. What are they emphasizing? What kind of activities? The Delphi study I mentioned quite a lot of benchmarking studies where we went to companies to learn how they did it actually with our own benchmarking institute in Berlin, with the colleagues from Switzerland and from America. A lot of expert interviews to understand how expert would judge this, how we can assess knowledge handling, and then the projects with companies, for example, from Volkswagen, from the German air traffic control, there was a Ministry of Home Affairs involved, the police, so large and small companies. And the core is we focus about what we are doing. So we create products, we sell products, or we service the customer. And we need, for doing this task, we need some knowledge. This is what feeds into this. And we create knowledge in terms of experiences. So this is the focus. And in order to understand knowledge, I use these terms: create knowledge, store or capture, then share this, and apply this. Once I was giving a presentation, and there was one guy from ThyssenKrupp, one large steel company in Germany, which about 400 different sites and smaller companies, and he was a knowledge manager for this company producing concrete plants, and he was responsible for the intranet and getting the lessons learned from the projects, putting it on the wiki, and making sure that people access this. And he challenged me, okay, Mr. Hasig, I'm only the person who is providing this, I'm creating the environment, this is the task of the people to do it. But my understanding is, yes, it's right, but you have, if you design a solution, then you have to think about how we can motivate, how we can incentivize the people, how we can make them, how can we create their skills in order to really to understand this and apply it in their new projects. And if we get this right, then we have certain success factors or areas where we have to design things, or at least we have to understand it. For example, company culture. We know from change management that we cannot change a company culture. It takes 10 and more years. Nevertheless, the way the company culture is implies how you can provide them with IT support. One example, there is a large automotive company which wanted to bring the expertise of all those involved in the leather design of the seats and all this kind of interior design with the leather and all this kind of stuff. And obviously, the company does not have a kind of open culture. What does this mean is that if you have a kind of IT support where the guy from Mexico, the guy from Germany and from India, and they can share each other, you have to ensure that their line managers are not able to look into this forum and say, what kind of stupid question do you ask your colleague overseas? Because you are supposed to know this. This kind of access has to be denied, so understanding that you have a kind of rigid company culture implies how you design access to a platform which enables the knowledge sharing across the world. Then you have some strategy and leadership, role models. There's a lot of research needed and understand how the middle management can support the effective sharing and knowledge. Another example, BMW changed their research R&D center. They employed a guy from MIT to do a communication analysis, and they found out that people beyond 50 yards don't communicate so much with each other. So they made a kind of project house, it called, and when they moved into the house, they had these open spaces with tables of different people sitting together. But the managers said that, okay, if you talk with your guy next to the next table, which was a different group, a different department, then please come first along my table to see me. So it took them until this open culture was really integrated into the behavior quite a while, and so that the middle managers also accepted that their employees, their staff, communicate directly without their knowledge with other colleagues. And if you go today, for example, to the factory in Leipzig of BMW, it's an open space where even the manager of the whole plant is sitting in a kind of open space. It's like HP, where they have this rule since the foundation of the company. Another thing is about roles and organizations. You have to have some responsibility. For example, if you capture certain knowledge, you have to make sure that it's valid, that other people can use it, and have to trust this. We did one project in an IT company where the IT guy has provided a very good environment, and people could search very well through all the databases of this company, but they didn't apply it. And the audit we did, it came down to the fact that there were some databases which were not trusted internally. So you didn't know where the information which you were on your screen came from. Does it come from the untrusted database, or does it come from the repository where everybody agrees that this is a trusted sources and we can use it? So there is certain roles where you have to understand the quality of the information and knowledge you share. Then controlling is about what is in there in terms of measurements, of indicators, and this is not only a thing which the management want to know, also the people involved there want to know, does it pay off? Does the 5 minutes I have to take in order to capture the lessons learned, does it pay off? And then the most overlooked area is human resources. It's about skills. When we did our first project, we published this, and we couldn't publish the case study from this pharmaceutical company. It was the only company we found in Europe at that time which invested in human resources, in training of their medical doctors, of their chemists, of their biologists, of their pharmacists. They invested a lot in IT, a search engine, and taxonomy, which covers all the links, controlled vocabulary to retrieve things, but they also invested in the skills. And what I mean with skills is being able to search. Are you Googling or are you searching to understand if this is trustful, to criticize this, which is unlearned today, because all the chairs of library management and these are cut down and abolished for example, in German universities. And also, for example, BMW asked a professor from Leipzig University to design a training course for their middle managers to be able to write lessons learned. So those shop floor managers should be able to write lessons learned. So if you have, for example, engineers, the first time when they have to produce some extensive work is when they do their dissertation. Before it's about tests and mathematics, and there are very few opportunities that an engineer can really write up stuff very comprehensively. But we always wanted to make a project in this area, but it was only in the 10 years I was working in this, only Audi which came along once to ask about this, and it's still overlooked. It's mainly about giving people an idea which button to click when they got a new software application called Knowledge Management System. And then, well, there's this European framework which is similar, and in terms of how to make this very practical terms is there's 5 steps. You focus where we want to do it. All companies which try to do it all over the corporation failed. We have, in the case studies we did, we have 2 companies who agreed, yes, we failed. There was one American company and one British company. Other companies with other backgrounds might not want to disclose that they failed sometimes. So, for example, let's assume that we do it in sales. Then we have to understand, okay, what is the system limited? Because when you talk about knowledge use, in order to understand what is good, what is wrong, sometimes people start talking about other areas which are not under their influence. So you have to get an understanding, okay, what we are talking about. We're talking about the sales process, for example. We want to sell a project. And then we identify what kind of knowledge we need for this. For example, customer knowledge. We want to know about the customer knowledge. And the customer knowledge in the context of sales is different than from the customer knowledge in the product development, because here you want to know who has taken the decision to contract us, while in the development phase you want to know more about the detailed customer requirements. And then you apply these lenses. How do we create knowledge? Which tools and methods do we use? How do we share this? How do we capture this? Which tools and methods do we use? You come to an agreement with those people who are working in the process. If you interview if this method with managers, then they tell you always how it should be done, and not how it's done. And when you have the kind of understanding what is good, what is to be improved, so this kind of visualized here by the traffic light symbol. The red dots are those where they are not very good in, for example, creating knowledge. Then you can go to these huge portfolio of tools and methods out there. You can select a couple of methods. Also, people from the company have some ideas. You try to describe the solution, and then with these methods and tools you transform these solutions into tasks, and then you look how we can fit the tasks we create out of this solution into our daily working processes. And then it's a way to understand how the environment fits in order to implement this finally. There some companies have used it. So in order to sum up, the discipline lacks of consensus, need for more research, and this is also basically agreed by those people I have been able to interview as experts in Germany and the UK so far. KM practice, sometimes companies refrain from saying it's knowledge management initiative, but it's still, the challenges remain. It's about transferring from one generation, the baby boomers, to the next generation. How we transfer this from one side to the other side. I'm at the moment working with two Danish companies, one from the oil industry or the other from the food industry, and they have exactly the point that they have different sites all over Europe, and they try to transfer the knowledge from one side to the other side. And then my suggestion is to embed these activities, knowledge-related activities, into what we do anyways, and slightly change the way we do things, which is a hard way to change. And therefore, we have to find the right fit in order to make it aligned with the culture, with the skills, with the leadership in the organization. All right, I hope I gave you some idea about how to do it on an organizational level, in case that you are involved in such activities. There's a lot of literature out there, and I'm happy to answer any questions which I'm able to answer. Otherwise, I have to refer you to others. Thank you very much.